Artificial intelligence, or AI, is a very strong tool that gives us a chance to find cures for diseases, clean the oceans, but there's also a risk it can be misused. How can we find a way to get the benefits without causing ourselves and the human population any problems?
We need to have spaces to sustain a dialogue on artificial intelligence and its impact on our social values. We also need to invest in human consciousness when it comes to artificial intelligence and have broader discussion on the matter.
Okay, welcome to this evening with Edward Snowden, which we could aptly title Privacy in the Age of Coronavirus 2019. Before we get started, hi Ed, how the hell are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's been quite a number of years now.
Are you practicing?
Really, time's getting increasingly crazy, but it's good that we can still have these conversations. You know, this is kind of the magic of the internet. Even when the world is shutting down, here I am, and here you are.
And are you practicing social distancing?
Yeah, you know, somebody could say.
You have some experience.
I've been practicing social distancing for a number of years. Actually, I saw a announcement from the U.S. Department of State, right, the passport authority that canceled my passport so many years ago, and they were advising Americans to avoid travel and return to the United States. They said because they, you know, whatever.
So you were thinking...
I looked at that and I was like, no, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks.
All right, before we get started, I have a couple of messages. And first, a message from CPHDOX, which has a very special relationship with you, Ed. In 2014, CPHDOX hosted the international premiere of Citizen4, Laura Poitras's documentary, which allowed viewers to firsthand experience these historical moments inside the Mirror Hotel in Hong Kong, during which you made headlines and basically changed our understanding of the internet, of surveillance and privacy. CPHDOX also distributed your film in Denmark and has been working hard to make this conversation happen ever since. And so they're really grateful, and so am I, that you've agreed to participate tonight.
It's my pleasure. I watched the film, too, about artificial intelligence, iHuman. I thought it was interesting.
I actually have a warm regard from Tonje Hessen-Schei, the director of iHuman. And she told me this weekend that actually she's tested positive for COVID-19.
Wow.
But she is fine under the circumstances, and told me that she's sorry not to be here with you, but that her film about artificial intelligence, iHuman, is available on the CPHDOX online platform through April 5th. So please go watch it there. Also, a big thanks to all the staff that's helped from CPHDOX, Marie, the team who's working hard to make all of this happen. Please go watch all of their films on their website. This is how we can make sure the festival survives. Also, thanks to the technician, Nana and Eske, who are making these online events happen. A big shout out to Ben Weisner and the team from ACLU and the Freedom of the Press Foundation. I am not going to bore you all too much with my bio. I just want to say that my life and my career has changed tremendously because of your choices and your actions, Ed. And more specifically, the documents you chose to pass on to Laura Poitras, with whom I worked for more than 5 years, and to whom I'm immensely grateful. I have actually never met you before this way, or properly spoken to you, and so I'm very happy to finally do this tonight.
It's
I'm also
my pleasure to be talking to you as well, and I hope the impact on you from the revelation of mass surveillance in 2013 has been positive.
I'm not going to spend so much time on your biography, even though in a very self-effacing way, as usual, you said maybe we should remind some people who I am, since it's been, you know, that many years. If there's anybody who's wondering who this guy is, you know, Google Edward Snowden, and he's on the internet. This is also
or
the time.
Google, use another search engine.
Yeah, that's right. DuckDuckGo. I want to start with, I've been breaking news here in Denmark today. I want to talk about the special situation that we're in now because of the coronavirus. I read your biography, and it struck me how big an impact 9/11 had back, 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, on you as a person, and how influential that was in your later choices. And I've heard in the last couple of weeks over and over how this new situation with the virus is comparable to 9/11. And so I want to ask you, having broken news today about the Danish government wanting to use phone metadata for fighting coronavirus, is this a similar situation? Are we moving into a direction where this new situation is starting similar surveillance and privacy measures?
Well, let me quickly, before I get directly into that, just remind viewers, if they haven't read the reporting or aren't familiar with it, generally when we're talking about phone metadata, people hear this phrase metadata. They're like, what is that? What does that mean? Right. You can think of metadata as activity records. So formally, the United States government considers metadata data about data, right? And it's this recursive, confusing, intentionally opaque sort of structure. But when you think about what it actually consists of, they're saying not what you said on a phone call, but who you called, how long you called them for, where you were when you called them.
And in this specific situation, it's about your location. That is
precisely.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, you know, when we think location and our phones, we think location services, right? We think, oh, we turn off location permissions on our phone, or we disable location, or that app doesn't get location, and then boom, we're not being tracked anymore. But this is actually much more complex than that, and you can't turn it off that way. This is not location services that's telling Google where you are. This is not the GPS on your phone. This is another type of location information that's actually derived from just the mere fact that your phone is turned on and connected to the network. If you think briefly, when somebody dials your phone, why is it that only your phone rings? And of all the phones in the world, somebody sends a text message, only you get it? Every handset has to be associated with a network, right?
It keeps telling the mast, here I am, you know, you can reach me at this location. Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, so this is what it is. All of these cell phone towers to which your phone is connected, regardless of whether you've got GPS on or off, regardless of whether you have location services on or off, if your phone's radio is on, if you can get a message, you're authenticated on this network, and the network makes a note of that. They say this phone at this time was connected to this cell phone tower. And if you extrapolate that out, not from you, but to the person you're calling, whether they're on a different part of the city, different home, different country, what this actually means is the cell phone network has a record of the location of every handset for every phone, every person around the world at every given time. Now, the local cell phone providers that run those cell phone companies or those cell phone sites, right? Because there's not one company that runs all these in the world, they're all over the place. They can save these records, and this is not regulated. There's not really any privacy protections built into law right now in basically any country that say you can't do this or you can only do this for a certain number of times.
And in Denmark, they've decided to keep doing this, even though the European legal system said, well, actually, this is in breach of I think it was the human rights. And so we have a special situation here in Denmark where they keep these records.
Precisely that, where, you know, you've got things from one institution like the EU broadly, but they go, look, we can't strictly direct member states to legislate this law or that law, or it hasn't happened. These countries do their own thing. Whether you're in Denmark, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in China, the basic fact of technological function is whoever runs these cell phone masts, these cell phone sites that you're connecting to, can make a record of this. And because they can, they frequently do. And then there's this open question of, well, what do they do with this? Today, we see around the world, places like Denmark, they're going, well, why don't we provide this to the government? Or in other countries, you have governments going, why don't we make them hand this over? Or why don't we ask them for this? And so this raises this big question of, is this okay? Is this right? And we'll get to that in a minute. But you asked me before.
And will it work?
Right. You asked me before how we got into this. You know, is this like 9/11 and sort of what's the similarity there? And it's, of course, very different in the context of it's not a terrorist attack. This is a force of nature. But what is similar is that these are both crises that have produced panic. In very broad populations, and it's not actually localized like 9/11 was in a particular city, in a particular country. This has spread around the world. And so you've got politicians who feel an obligation to do something. You have a lot of doctors and specialists who want to do everything they can to help people.
Well, in this case, it's the health authorities that say, we can use this movement data. We can use a census of where people are right now to map where are people, and then we can see, are our measures working? Can we control the spread of this virus? Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, that's actually the question is, one, does that work? And there's not really any hard evidence now that it does work. This is more of a theory where they go, look, if we have the locations of every phone, basically, if we have the location of every phone, and we presume people are walking around with these things in their pockets and purses.
Which most people, in fairness, are, right?
We track the people, right? Mm-hmm. So now we have a proxy for every individual's location. And we could go, well, is this person following that person? Are they traveling together? Are they on the same bus? Right. Have they gone to the same airport?
Which we've seen in Israel, where they're going to send you a text message if you were together with someone who had the virus and then tell you, go into quarantine or you can go to jail for 6 years.
Right. And it is possible that in certain cases, you could actually derive a fairly reliable inference that these people are co-travelers. They're on the same route, they're on the same bus, they're on the same plane or whatever. But you actually have to think about, well, what is the precision of this location tracking and what inferences can actually be drawn from that and how reliable are they in fact?
But let's just say that we want to use this on a macro level. We want to see general movements. We want to see cities. Maybe like we don't want to look at individuals. We don't want to look at, and they say they want to use anonymized data, so data that doesn't easily, translate into Ed and Henrik sitting in Moscow and Copenhagen. That's what they're saying.
Right. So there's a lot of problems with this, and we got off one. We'll get to the next. So this one on anonymization, right? To people at home, like, what does that mean? They take your location data from all these cell phone towers that they've got for everyone, and they package it up together and they give it to somebody. Whether they give it to the NSA, whether they give it to the intelligence service, whether they give it to the law enforcement agency, whether they give it to the health authorities, they're packaging up the movements of every person that they have, and they're handing them over. And then they go, well, we take your name off of it. We know it's your phone, the phone company, because we have your billing record, but we don't provide that. Maybe we don't provide the phone number. Maybe we don't provide the actual technical handset identifiers that say this phone.
I don't think that's the plan, no.
Is unique. Right. And yeah, precisely. But let's say they do, right? Let's take the best case scenario. They wipe away what's called the IMSI and the IMEI. Mm-hmm. This is the International Mobile Subscriber Identity. This is what's baked into the SIM card of your phone. And it gives you your phone number. And then there's a second identifier in your phone, what's called the International Mobile Equipment Identifier. And this is baked into the actual handset, right? You bought the phone at the store. You can never change this. These two identifiers get paired. You can swap out your SIM card and get another phone number. But the phone company, the phone network knows it's the same physical phone with a different SIM card. These things.
But what if it is really just person A here, person B here?
Right.
A and 2 coordinates.
And so
this is helpful. And this is any surveillance. I just want to push a bit on this. Is any surveillance in a crisis like this applicable for the common good, or are you strictly against any form of data mining to fight things like diseases?
Well, generally, we've got a lot of data on this, and this is that mass surveillance does not work. Remember, when we looked at the case of counterterrorism in the United States, the United States orders that required the largest phone companies in the United States to collect the phone records of everyone in the country, right, and everybody who's traveling over their phone networks, and daily hand these over to the NSA. And the NSA, this was all secret, nobody even knew they were doing it, could run any analytics, use big data, use artificial intelligence, whatever they wanted, to trawl through these things and try to find the terrorists that they thought were hiding the weeds. And this program operated for more than 13 years. And in the wake of it being revealed in 2013, then President Barack Obama ordered the investigation of 2 independent commissions into this. Now, I say independent. They were appointed by the president. They were supposed to give NSA a gold star and say everything's okay and this is good. But to his credit, they had total access to classified information. They could go to the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and look at these things and go, do they work? And they found that despite the operation of these things happening in two ways, there were two different groups. The names of them don't matter for this context, but these groups looked into it and they found that they had never stopped a single terrorist attack. And they had only made and these are their words, concrete difference in a single counterterrorism investigation. And that was of a cab driver in California wiring, I think, about the $8,500 back to his clan in Somalia, which happened to be associated with Al-Shabaab, which was a listed terrorist group. He wasn't supposed to be, allegedly, they didn't think he was directly intending to support terrorism, but it was prohibited under U.S. law. And even in that case, and again, remember, they've sacrificed the privacy of at least 330 million people to operate this program for more than a decade, and all they got was a cab driver wiring money. That they would have gotten this information anyway through alternative means. And I think this is the real question here. Right. Legal sources, because they said the FBI was already closing in on this guy, because, of course, when you send the money, you leave records. This is the question here. What is a better protector of public health? Is it the community? Is it doctors? Is it specialists? Or are they our collective social force where you go to the doctor, you get tested for the coronavirus, you find out you have contracted this illness, and then you think about your friend that you were traveling with, and you go, hey, we were shaking hands, we were laughing, we were hugging, whatever, your spouse, whatever. You immediately call these people. You tell them to be careful. The hospital contacts the Transportation Bureau. The airline has, of course, a roster of everybody in these seats, and they notify people. We already have these capabilities, right? And they've been working in other countries like South Korea and been very effective. This is really the problem when we look at this from the macro scale. What we see is the government is looking at this, the health industry.
I'm going to cat bomb you now, Ed. And I'm going to ask you to do slightly shorter answers, and I hope this is going to work out. I think you'll have to leave me alone for a second, because we only have 30 minutes, and
sure,
we just spent 10 on one.
We might be able to go a little longer.
All right, that would be good.
We're talking about these technical things.
Okay, go on.
The fundamental problem that we have with this, right, is there was actually an article in the Financial Times, which was just a few days ago by a writer named Yuval Harari. And it was the future after coronavirus.
Right.
And what people are missing, that I think people who are looking at this from a longer span are catching, is the coronavirus is a serious problem, but it is a transient problem. We will eventually have a vaccine, or even if we don't, we will eventually have herd immunity. In 2 years, this problem will be gone. But the consequences of the decision that we make now are permanent. And I think this is crucial to bear in mind from the perspective of a free society. A virus is harmful, but the destruction of rights is fatal. This is a permanent thing that we don't get back. When we lose a right that we fought a revolution for, that there was a movement founded for, that took 100 years of effort to win, and then we lose it in a moment of panic. This is the connection with 9/11. We had the birth of the Patriot Act. We had the birth of mass surveillance. We had the United States directly engaged in running rendition, as they call it, or as everybody else calls it.
But still, Ed, you were gung-ho all these things right after 9/11 because you were filled, as you describe in your book, with, nationalist fervor. You wanted to kill these motherfuckers. Sorry, pardon my French, but isn't that accurate?
To an extent. Of course, I didn't know about the torture camps. I didn't know about the drones, just as nobody else did at the time, because it was secret. The desire for revenge, the desire for serving my country, the desire for doing what, remember, the United States government was telling the public at the time, young men like me, which was we were going to Iraq to free the oppressed. That sounded pretty good to me. Was it a mistake? Was it a mistake? Yes. Did I believe the government? Yes. And this is the problem. Whenever there is a crisis, rationality exits the room, and you have policy that is being driven by, yeah, right. But you have policy that is being driven by a panic in the pursuit of benefits that at the time are theoretical. The Vice President of the United States at the time, Dick Cheney, was saying we have to engage in torture, and it will be a good thing because these guys are planting bombs and biological weapons and things like that in the United States, in sleeper cells. And the only way we'll uncover them when the timer is ticking down to the explosion is by basically, you know, poking drills into their hands or trying to drown them. Locking them in cages with their darkest fears, you know, snakes or insects. And ultimately, it culminated where we were chaining people to concrete walls in sites in Afghanistan where they literally froze to death and died. But again, they said these things would work. They said they were necessary. They said they would be beneficial. We don't want to do them, but the threat is so great that this is the only way that we can really counter them. And I think this is
a short question. How do you think you strike the right balance then between a sincere and, you know, pressing need to do something about a virus or another natural disaster and the wish to briefly suspend certain, you know, fundamental liberties in order to, you know, strike a greater societal good? Is that never okay?
When is the last time that you remember a brief suspension of civil liberties? And this is the thing. In the time that we live in...
I like to be the devil's advocate, Ed.
Right. No, I understand that. But this is, you know, it's a question that everybody should consider. When we see emergency measures passed, particularly today, they tend to be sticky. The emergency tends to be expanded. Then the authorities become comfortable with some new power. They start to like it. And the original emergency passes. Coronavirus is gone. Terrorism is no longer a big thing. They find new applications, new uses for this new power they gained. And they went, well, maybe we don't need to give this up. Maybe we can pass a new law that makes this a permanent authority. And we've seen this happen in country after country. It's not a local domestic issue. This becomes a culture of safety at all costs, right. Where they go, look, if there's any risk, we have to reduce it down to the minimum imaginable level at any possible price. And this is fundamentally in conflict, I believe, with the concept of a free and open society. And this is a little bit unpopular and a little bit controversial to say. Because there's all these arguments about, security versus privacy. In a free and open society, the thing is we're supposed to say we need both. Right? We're not being asked for security or privacy. We do the best we can on security. We mitigate risks, whether we're talking about biological threats, whether we're talking about political and criminal threats. But we prioritize an order society for the defense of the individual and the common collective good. And this is derived from the protection of rights. If we begin destroying rights, sacrificing rights in order to improve things, we're actually making things worse.
I'm going to have to ask you to try and come up with slightly shorter answers. if you want to. I want to segue to talk about artificial intelligence because we were supposed to, if we had actually been in a movie theater tonight, we would have just seen a film about artificial intelligence. And I want to do that by talking about and sort of sticking a bit with the previous topic. We have here in Denmark a system made by a company called Palantir that is used by the police. They also have it in Norway, where the director of iHuman is from. What can you say about this new movement to use artificial intelligence in these types of very difficult and sensitive areas, such as criminal justice, policing, etc., where there are big possibilities, I would say, for these types of technologies?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you think about again, the cell phone tracking is a great example of this. Artificial intelligence is promising a lot of things that are not possible. in the film I, Human. For example, there's a person who's saying, look, what we can do is look at someone's face and have a machine determine their sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And this is, it should be chilling to all of us. But we need to understand that this is exactly how any kind of large institution prefers to function. They like to prioritize efficiency. But in free societies, efficiency is actually dangerous. We try to limit the exercise of efficiency because we don't want probabilistic policing, right? We don't want people to be creating algorithms that says this person is probably a criminal, this person is probably a member of this disfavored minority group, and so we'll discriminate on this basis. We intentionally make the act of policing difficult. We make them get warrants. We make them go through hoops to try to seek evidence. We limit the kind of powers they can use. We limit when they can use force, to what extent. We limit how people can be imprisoned. We limit the conditions they can be held under. We stack the deck against power because that is the only way to guarantee a measure of liberty. When you concentrate too much power in too few hands, this is called tyranny. And it seems to me in a lot of ways we're missing this. Now, when we bring this back to our phone case, this gets us back to, can a computer tell someone's innermost thoughts? And the answer is no. What it's doing is it's assigning probabilities based on what are effectively stereotypes that are being generated based on models. They're ingesting, for example, the corpus of, Facebook photos or something like that. And they go through the profile and all of these people who identify themselves as being as a certain orientation. They go, that's group A. And then they take everybody else and they go, that's group B.
But
and
what if we have
Go ahead.
If we have the phone example and we see that, it looks like people are congregating every Wednesday in this park and there's hundreds of people and they shouldn't be doing that because they might spread the virus. That's not, a lot of artificial intelligence, but we might miss that point if we don't have this type of system working for us.
And that's true. In that case, that's true. If you're just looking for a congregation around a certain cell phone tower that's sporadic, this kind of system can pick that up. But the question is that gain in efficiency worth the cost to civil and public and ultimately individual power?
That's the big question. Yeah.
To our liberty. Because when we look at this, right, this piece that I mentioned by Yuval Harari, which I would recommend everyone read, is what we have is a transition from government that's looking at us from the outside in mass surveillance. They used to be looking at your phone, right, and they wanted to know what you were clicking on, right? They want to know what you were reading, what you're buying, this kind of associated information. But now when we get into this health context, they want to know, are you ill? They want to know your physical state. They want to know what's happening under your skin. Imagine if we permit governments to say, look, we can track every cell phone of every person everywhere all the time. We can make inferences on the basis of this data set, and then we can take executive actions as a result of this information. What keeps them from going, well, we're worried about health. We're worried about public health. We're worried about protecting people. The primary symptom of the coronavirus is a fever, right? This develops before the cough and persists throughout the course of the virus. It's your immune system fighting it off. We're going to send an order to every fitness tracker that can get something like pulse or heart rate. And we're going to start demanding access to this kind of activity. And now we're going to go, well, these people have elevated pulses. And now, 5 years later, the coronavirus is gone. This data is still available to them. They start looking for new things. They go, oh, there's a terrorist group out there. They're putting propaganda on the internet, like we saw from ISIS.
This is the hammer looking for a nail kind of thing, right?
Right, exactly.
Which we've seen also in the last days with Clearview, this other company that provides facial recognition for law enforcement, that they're like, well, we can use our tool for the coronavirus.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, this is a constant problem, whether we're talking facial recognition. What happens now when we start to put these authorities together and remix them? They already know what you're looking at on the internet, right? They already know where your phone is moving. Now they know what your heart rate is, your pulse is. What happens when they start to intermix these and apply artificial intelligence to it? And Harari asks, if you have this bracelet that tracks your temperature and your pulse, and they know you're watching a propaganda video, or you're just watching a speech from a member of parliament who's the party in power at the time, and they see you get angry, right? Because emotions really are biological processes. These are products that have measurable states associated with them by sensors. And they go, well, this person doesn't like what's being said. It's one thing if an advertiser does this, still chilling, it's still dangerous, or a bank does it, or it happens in a job interview. But what happens when you have built, over the course of a generation, the architecture of oppression? And you live in Denmark, right? You go, look, my government's not that scary. I trust them. It's fine. The only thing I'm afraid of are the Swedes coming across the sea, right? And they haven't done that in a while, so it's okay now. Times are good. But then,
or the U.S. buying
there's an election.
That's a whole other discussion.
And then you get a Donald Trump, and then you think that's
there he is.
And then it gets worse.
Right.
And then it gets worse. And you have built a system of turnkey tyranny that is available to the next leader, that can, in secret, at any time, be twisted. And you have no civil power remaining to resist it, because you cannot coordinate. You cannot gather in public, because the government instantly knows all of these people are around. These cell phones have all congregated in the park to discuss politics, to sing songs, whatever. And the police are already there. And in fact, the police don't even need to be there to take some action. They can notify your employer and you no longer have a job. They can revoke your residence permit if you're not a citizen. All of these things can happen programmatically, algorithmically, and we are moving closer and closer to that world every day that we let panic motivate our decisions rather than rational reflection regarding inevitable consequences about this narrowing of our rights.
I want to turn to a couple of questions from the audience, and I hope we have a couple of more minutes, and that you can provide short answers, Mister. Someone asked me, and I forget the name, about optimism. I think that's a good thing to talk about right now. Which in technology, all this is going on. Is anything providing optimism for you? And what do you suggest that young people look to for optimism right now, where jobs and the future looks pretty bleak?
If you look at human history and the problems that we were struggling against, if you look at the frequency of wars, when you look at the level of poverty in a society, when you look at the impact of health crises, we are doing better today than we have by any measure in really any period of history. We do have extreme problems today when we look at things like climate, when we look at things like economic inequality, when we look at things like the apportionment of power and its distribution in society, whether we're talking about between the government and those that are being governed by it, whether we're talking about the old and the young. We have real problems, but we are making progress in basically every direction. When you think about the coronavirus, we can coordinate across the world instantly today, and we are doing so. We are trying to share techniques. We are trying to share lessons learned from places like Korea, from places like Wuhan, from places like Italy, and other places, and it is working to a great extent. Our problems will still be severe, right? Difficulty does not go away. And risks will always exist in a free society, because if someone is going to have any level of power, whether they're individual or institutional, having power means the potential that it could be misused. And there's only a certain level you can police the individual, the smallest unit of society, before you stop being a society at all and start looking more like a prison. Things are getting better.
Have you seen over the last months this the misinformation, all of these things that have been going on the internet that are problematic? Have you seen them gravitating towards a more public awareness from some of these tech companies? And we've seen a very concerted push from all of these companies to actually try and do something about this disease. Is there anything that gives you optimism? Maybe even the rule of law trying to step in and control some of these companies in the longer term perspective?
I think this is actually controversial, but there's a little bit of a mistaken, I think, common belief that, look, we need to get tech companies to deal with this misinformation problem online. Because in order to do that, tech companies have to be put in the position where they're the deputy of truth, right? The government in this country or that country goes, we don't like this information. We say this is not true. You, the company, are going to agree with this, or we actually don't want to tell you what's true or not true in each thing because that's too much work for us and it politically exposes us. So now you wear the hat and you have the responsibility to decide what is true and reliable, what is fact and not. And now you've got Mark Zuckerberg deciding what people can and can't read. That's a very dangerous direction to go in. In the short term, they might be effective in it. They might do useful things. It might be beneficial for society.
So you can't even see in a situation like this when people are told, that if they don't, sneeze, they're probably fine, or they're given totally false information, and this could, potentially kill people. That it's okay for tech giants to filter content.
No, it's definitely not okay for people to spread this information. They shouldn't be doing that. The question is, how do we best respond to this? And it's really a question of, when we talk about this whole fake news problem, which is what you're really getting to, do we want to empower what are already some of the most powerful institutions in the world? Facebook is the internet for an extraordinary percentage of the population. To make these decisions, to give them censorship authorities and begin censoring more information around here? Or do we educate people to help them understand what is reliable information, what is factual information, what is a specious rumor that, again, is dangerous and harmful information? Because, look, if you trust Facebook to tell people what's good for them and what's bad for them, Facebook will exercise this authority ultimately in the fullness of time to the benefit of Facebook, not to the benefit of society. And there's this other part of it is this the best way to respond to the question? We talk about viruses, right? We're talking about herd immunity. Misinformation is the same way. People who have been lied to, people who have been screwed by false information, they become angry as a result of this when they discover that they've been exploited. They tend to look more carefully. They may be embarrassed in front of friends, and it's harder to trick them again. This kind of critical thinking is a desirable trait to inculcate in a population, and without it, we are vulnerable to these kind of things. What has happened is we have lived in a very trusting time where a lot of public authority information could be trusted and was reliable. And in the last decade, we have seen an intentional, concerted effort by those in power, unfortunately, even in governments of very advanced societies, which should work otherwise, intentionally trying to reduce the level of trust in reliable information.
You and I both grew up in
unreliable information.
You and I both grew up in a time where the internet was this new frontier, and it was this totally free place where you could, try out new things. You could do crazy things, and I'm sure
it was also a place where you had to prove something when you said it instead of just.
But isn't it fair enough that the internet is no longer that place, and that there might be new things around the corner where and that it's for us old people, we're not in a place to want that internet back?
I mean, it's an interesting question. The internet has certainly changed, and I wrote about this in my memoir to a great degree from the internet I remember. It used to be more of a creative and cooperative space, and now it's more of a commercial and competitive space.
Right.
Everybody is striving for attention, and it's clear when you and I look at this, and I think when most people look at this, that when the public commons becomes a kind of blood sport, dog-eat-dog world, where attention is the prize to be won, people are going to do bad things in order to win. And we do need to find ways. also our adversaries had been working on the same capabilities. And I felt that people needed to understand this, because you cannot protect yourself against a threat that you do not know exists. You cannot consider the wisdom, the propriety of a policy if you don't know that policy has been enacted. I, of course, had strong political feelings, but the reason that I went to journalists rather than publishing this information myself was I did not feel that it was right for me to say, this random guy is going to decide what you should know, what you shouldn't know, what your laws should be, what they shouldn't be. I made my argument, right? But I trusted journalists to make those decisions. I felt they were best placed to make these decisions about what is in the public interest to know from the corpus of this archive. I accepted and understood and actually agreed with the fact that not all of this information should be published in sort of a raw and unredacted form. Some of it would never be useful. Some of it, you've seen this information.
Oh, yeah.
Some of it's not related to anything that's really useful for the broad public, but it is very useful for journalists working on a story or who are getting arguments from the government about this is a valuable program, you shouldn't publish this. If you do, we'll lose this collection. Or they're telling you, regardless, you need this on background to sort of fact check these things. But at the same time, you don't.
We did this.
Public. Right, and you did this. Mm-hmm. Now, the Intercepts archive has shut down. The original material is still held by a number of people around the world, understanding. At least 4 different groups have access. 5, I think, groups have access to a great deal of this information. And I do think as time goes on, the sensitivity of this information becomes less. Even the government has argued this publicly.
And the newsworthiness, of course.
Right. Well, yeah, the newsworthiness of it diminishes, but the historic values sometimes can increase. Mm-hmm. But again, as for how they're handled, I don't think it's my call to make. Mm-hmm. But I think there are enough people involved in this who do have the public interest at heart, and it's very clear over the years they've given up a lot to do this. They've earned breathing space to take some time now and think about who is best positioned if sort of short-form journalism is no longer or interested in this material. Who's the best sort of institution to look at this in a longer term? And I'm interested to see what they come out with, but I'm going to tell them what to do.
I think 2 very quick yes and no style questions. Your family support you, and what are you going to do next? You've written your memoir. How old are you now, Ed?
I'm 36, I think.
And you've already written your memoir. What are you going to do next? What do you do?
Write the next chapter. Right now, I spend most of my time doing research on this phone surveillance problem. Mm-hmm. We built an infrastructure today that is being intentionally exploited. Even if you love the government, right? Even if the government implicitly, you would have the government's children, send them off there. The state will take care of them.
Which of course you do in Russia.
Oh, 100%. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Russian has never done anything wrong throughout the history of society. No, I mean, the politics in this place are historically problematic. But we have to recognize that government is constantly going to struggle. Government is constantly going to abuse the people. And the only thing that will create a better government is dissent. I mean, it's ultimately people standing up and saying, this is too far. I don't agree with this. I don't like this. I don't like you. I don't like the way you speak. I don't like this policy. I don't like. And I do like this. That is democracy. That is how we reach consensus. If we don't express our opinions, if we don't develop our beliefs, but most especially, if we are not willing to stand for the beliefs, we have no influence. And we are being influenced every day. We're being monitored. We're being tracked. We're being recorded. specifically so they can nudge us, whether it's to watch this TV show or buy this fast food, or to change our votes. People are trying to change our minds. And the way things get better is when we work together to change theirs.
Edward Snowden, thank you so much for having this conversation with me tonight. Thank you, CPHDOX. Thank you to all the viewers out there. And I wish you all the best of luck and everything good for you, Edward Snowden, so much.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure to have this conversation, and I wish you the best. Stay free.